At the beginning of the 19th century, when industry was becoming America's religion, Brooklyn was considered the hinterland of unreachable Manhattan, and Greenpoint in turn, the hinterland of Brooklyn. For immigrants, it was one of the key gateways to America. For some, the beginning and the end of their journey. In the second half of the 20th century, the area between Newtown Creek and the highway connecting Brooklyn with Manhattan was known as Little Poland. You could hear people speaking Polish, shopping at Polish stores, visiting Polish doctors, barbers, lawyers, and restaurants. But there was never a place like this in Poland. Watch the Greenpoint Tales.
My name is Alex Storozynski, or in Poland it would be known as Storozynski, or as my mother and father used to call me, Olek, or if they wanted me to do something, it was Olush. Well, my father was from Lvov, which today is Lviv, and he left Poland when he was 17 because the Soviet Union invaded Poland at the same time as Nazi Germany did. So I was the first one in my family born in the United States. I was born in the Promised Land, known as Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Well, for them, Greenpoint was very important because there were other Polish immigrants there, war refugees, people who had suffered through the war just like my parents had. My mother was a slave laborer. She was arrested and enslaved in Nazi Germany, picking up body parts and pieces of metal for the Nazi war machine. And so they had people that went through similar things. But they quickly realized that they can make money buying and renovating houses. So they started flipping houses. And they bought a house in Rockaway Beach, right on the ocean. And so I grew up with sand in my shoes, tanned and learning to boogie board and surf and swim. And we became more integrated into American society that way. But Greenpoint was always the base. They were always involved in Greenpoint. My older brother later was the first managing director of the Polish and Slavic Credit Union. And he took it from a fledgling mortgage lender where they had $20 million in assets in the early 1980s, and within 2 years modernized it. They had $100 million, and it took off, and so did my brother's banking career. The school was St. Francis de Sales, and most of the kids were Irish. There were a couple of Italian kids, but we were the first Polish family. So in fact, the first day we moved into a new house and I went to this Catholic school, the Irish kids tied me up to a telephone pole with my arms behind my back and started teasing me and smacking me around and saying, you're a Polak, was a slur. And I didn't realize until later that I was actually lucky because some black kids came into the neighborhood, because it was an all-white neighborhood, and the Catholic kids yelled, "Oh, those black kids," but they used the N-word, "stole our bike," and they chased after them. And they beat these poor kids to a pulp. They knocked out their teeth and they were bleeding. And I ran along, and when I saw what was happening, I thought, wow, I'm actually pretty lucky. I'm only called a Polak. I don't get treated like that. And that was a moment in my life that I realized that there's a totem pole of bigotry in the United States, and there are people who are mistreated more than Poles. So, yeah, it's you know, Poles were mistreated at the time. You know, there was this program called All in the Family, where Archie Bunker, this bigot, was making fun of the Poles. And my father would get very upset. And my mother would say, listen, I think you're missing the point. The point is to laugh at Archie. The point is to show how stupid bigotry really is. And so my mother sort of got it, you know, and she was much more tolerant than most of the people in our neighborhood. And I think it's much better than when I was a kid. I mean, there's still hatred, there's still bigotry, there's still racism, there's still anti-Semitism, there's still anti-Polish sentiment. But with each new generation, when children meet the children of the other, whoever the other is for you, and they get to know them and they realize, wow, they're just like me, you know. So it's moving in the right direction. There's still, unfortunately, a lot of bigotry in the world, but I'm optimistic that, you know, my daughter, for example, in her class, you know, her best friends, one girl's Nigerian, another girl is Dominican, and then she has an Irish friend, and she has a Jewish friend, and it's like someone took a deck of cards and shuffled it. So the more integrated the United States becomes, and the more we meet the other, I think the less fear there is, because I think bigotry is driven by fear and our own insecurities. I received a scholarship from the Kosciuszko Foundation to get my master's degree at Columbia University. And it paid for most of my tuition at Columbia. And thanks to that scholarship from the Kosciuszko Foundation, I became a journalist, and everything started from there, thanks to the foundation that we're sitting in. Well, after 2001, I was going through a divorce, and I had a house in New Jersey with my now ex-wife, and so I needed a place to live. And I started hanging out in a place called the Europa Club. And I became friends with Zbyszek Halecki, who everyone called Zibby. And Zibby was this colorful character who had this incredible nightclub, and he said, come, hang out, you know, hang out here. And he said, you're going through a divorce. He started introducing me to you know, Polish women, and introduced me to somebody who rented a cheap apartment for me, and lifted my spirits. He you know, anyone who's been through a divorce knows how miserable and horrible it can be. And thanks to Zibby, I bounced back. After being on the editorial board of the New York Daily News, I was invited to become the editor-in-chief of a new newspaper called AM New York. And I did that for 2 years. And then I became the city editor of a newspaper called the New York Sun. And I started feeling this pull back to Greenpoint and back to my Polish roots, and I started writing about Polish topics. At that point, I'd gotten to know Lech Wałęsa a little bit, so I wrote a couple of articles about Lech Wałęsa. I flew to Iraq and wrote about the Polish army in Iraq. And then I decided that I wanted to write a book about Kosciuszko, a biography of Kosciuszko, because for me, he had always been this incredible example of a prince of tolerance who stood up for freedom for everyone. And so I wrote this biography called The Peasant Prince, Thaddeus Kosciuszko and the Age of Revolution. And when the book was about to come out, I was invited here for lunch by the then president, who told me that he was retiring. And he said, you know, would you like to be the next president? And I said, well, not really. I'm a journalist, I know how to write. And then I was invited out to lunch by the chairman of the board, whose name was Witold Sulimirski. And they both knew. They said, look, when you were living in Greenpoint, you were the chairman of the credit union, the board. and I doubled the amount of money that they gave out in scholarships. And they said, that's what we do. We raise money for scholarships. And we know that you can do this. So they talked me into it, and I started giving back and raising money for the next kid that wanted to go to Columbia University to study journalism, or to do medical research at Harvard, or go to Stanford and study history. Well, Greenpoint sort of became this hipster haven where young people now go. I mean, Greenwich Village, you know, in the 60s was where young artists would go. But then Greenwich Village became too expensive. So Greenpoint and Williamsburg, Brooklyn became the haven of where young artists go. And so there's this incredible energy, and it's changing. There's still this Polish element of Greenpoint. But a lot of Poles have been moving out. They've been moving out to Long Island, or to New Jersey, or to Ridgewood, Queens. So it's changing. It's not like when I was a kid. I don't think you can pressure a neighborhood to keep ethnic roots. I'm more concerned about educating people from Greenpoint and people with Polish roots, and that's why I'm still involved in the foundation. I think you know, the American dream is to be a success. And if you stay in an ethnic neighborhood and only speak that language all the time, you're not going to get ahead. But if you go to a good university and become a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman, I think that's more important than you know, making sure that you can still go and have pierogi somewhere. So there's a saying in Polish, geniów nie oszukasz, and it means you can't fool your genes. It's in your blood. And as I started researching the story of my family, I started learning that I had 3 generations of spies in my family. My grandfather in Lvov was a spy working for the Dwójka. My father was working with the Cichociemne, and later a spy in London for the Polish government in exile. And my brother George went to work for the CIA. And so that's 3 generations of spies. So that's why I wrote a book called Spies in My Blood: Secrets of a Polish Family's Fight Against Nazis and Communists. And it tells the story of me traveling to Poland and learning about my roots and learning about what they did in fighting for a free Poland. I'm quite proud of this book because this book tells the story of not just my family, but Polish heroes like General Anders, like General Maciek, like Irena Sendler, who I got to interview, like Pani Janta, who worked you know, with the Polish government. And this book tells Polish history of the last 100 years, using them as an example of what they did. So I'm pretty proud of that.